Good afternoon, everyone. I am Mireya Solis, Senior Fellow and Knight Chair in Japan Studies at Brookings. And I want to welcome all of you to our afternoon program, TPP and RCEP, competing or complementary models of economic integration. Let me provide some background. Let me frame the issue for the discussion we're going to have this afternoon. I think it is clear that these two major trade agreements, the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, will define the parameters of economic integration in the world's most dynamic region, Asia. These are indeed mega undertakings. If you take into consideration that RCEP, for example, represents 30% of world GDP and comprises close to half of the world's population. And then also take into account the remarkable size and ambition of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, where you have a trade grouping that gathers countries that represent 40% of world GDP, and where you have the first and the third largest economies trying to negotiate with 10 other economies deep integration parameters. So the stakes in the successful negotiation of each of these trade agreements are very high. But I think there is less clarity on a central issue, and that is what kind of interaction there is between these two concurrent trade negotiations. And I would pose to all of you, just so that we can start to mull through these issues, that there are at least two narratives out there in trying to describe the interaction between these two important trade agreements. One story is about rivalry. And the idea here is that you have two rival trading blocs, one led by the United States, one led by China. And therefore, seen through the lens of rivalry, analysts usually describe zero-sum dynamics. And they use terms like containment, exclusion, marginalization. But there is another narrative, one that actually emphasizes positive sum dynamics, and one that makes the case that these two trade agreements share the same end goal. And therefore, they are about the construction of an Asia-Pacific free trade area. And if you are looking at the interaction of these two agreements through this lens of convergence, then you frequently hear words used such as pathways or building blocks, trying to convey the notion that there is a shared final destiny, a shared fate. But I would argue that the reality is far more complex than these two polar views of either rivalry or convergence. And therefore, in this seminar, we want to discuss the array of economic, political, and strategic forces that shape the interaction between RCEP and TPP. And let me highlight briefly why I think this reality is more complex. Let me just bring up three factors that I think that muddy the waters and make it very difficult to use just one term to describe what kind of dynamics there are, what kind of interplay between these two trade agreements. One, because actually competition is not only of the zero-sum kind. You can actually have constructive competition if this encourages negotiators to aim higher, to aim for higher quality agreements. Second, because we're not talking really about exclusive trading blocs. There's a fair degree of overlap in membership. And we do have many countries that have dual membership. Countries like Singapore, like Japan, Malaysia, Australia, Brunei, Vietnam are partaking in both negotiations. And this question of dual membership can actually get more interesting if we actually begin the discussion, which I hope we will do today, about perhaps China's potential participation in the future, because I do think that's the big elephant in the room. And I think that if China were to join, that would be a game changer of many levels, but certainly would force us to reconsider how we describe the interaction between these two trade agreements. And finally, because any discussion about possibly melding these two trade agreements in the future must start with an in-depth analysis of how alike or how different they are in terms of scope and negotiation modalities. Is there enough common ground to think that you can actually weld them together? Or, to put it more crudely, are we in fact comparing apples and oranges? So as you can see, there's a lot to discuss this afternoon. And I think we're off to a great start. We have a stellar keynote. We are deeply honored that Ambassador Sasae from the Embassy of Japan has agreed to deliver the keynote for this event. We always learn a great deal from the keen insights of Ambassador Sasae, and it's always a pleasure to welcome him to Brookings. So Ambassador Sasae, if you can please join us in the podium. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Milia, thank you very much for inviting me to this distinguished think tank of Washington. It's great to see, University of Pennsylvania has said that Brookings is the #1 think tank around the world. It's great to see that. And think tank is the place you think, but these days, ambassador doesn't think. Most of the time you use your body, not necessarily your brain. But so this is a good time for me to dwell on that very interesting subject just Milene laid out. But before starting on that point, let me just say a few words about Japan and Japanese perspective on the economy and trade. As you know, under the Prime Minister Abe, Japan has been moving forward quite a positive way. Economy is coming back gradually and dramatically, depending on the cases you are talking about. For the first time, 4 consecutive quarters of the year, we have positive growth, plus growth. And for the first time in 6 years, our job offer supersede job application. For the first time over the 5 years, our consumer price index is plus. For many years, it was negative, as you know. So indicators are all heading for the positive directions. And the Prime Minister said in his, address in the Diet recently that to make Japanese economy better, we need to see all this positive business cycling, be sure. And if you would see more of the corporate benefit, there'll be a more employment and higher wages. That would mean more investment and also consumption. Then that would turn into more of the corporate benefit. So Prime Minister said that he's determined to make the current session of Diet at the Diet to make sure that this would happen. And having said it, also we all recognize that this TPP and free trade agenda is a very important part of his priority agenda. Not only because that this would be a very important part of Abenomics, especially the third arrow of Abenomics, which is about structural adjustment, the regulatory and competitive policy, and on which he has been laid down his own visions, proposed many bills to the Diet, and now there are still debates going on in various councils of the government. Nowadays, more focus on the agriculture and labor market, and also pharmaceutical and medical industries. And not to limit to those, but these are some of the areas, and people are beginning to see more of the debate. And I hope that all this debate will lead into more of the substantive measures to be introduced. But I have to also say that whenever I talk about this Abenomics, people say that, well, what's the result? What is the impact? And we don't see a major impact of this, the measures. I think to some extent that is true, because all of these measures are more or less long-term shot. You can't see the change overnight, an impact overnight. Some of them are 3, 5, 10 years time frame. Some of them might be coming earlier. So it's a bit premature for you to judge the meaning of this Abenomics, especially the third arrow of his policy. But when it comes to free trade aspect of this Abenomics third arrow, I think we are rather coming to the specific, I would say, measurement. One is this TPP agenda, and the other is other, regional undertaking like RCEP and Japan, China, and Korean trilateral exercises. And Mireya laid out very interesting intellectual questions, which I thought very interesting. Because I myself had been involved with the startup of this Japan, China, Korea, and Japan ASEAN, or ASEAN plus 3, or ASEAN plus 6, while I was in Tokyo. So I know the history, and to be honest, I think while we thought about all this trilateral or ASEAN plus 3 or 6, we were not sure that we could make this free trade with the TPP or even the United States. I think the free trade with the United States is the biggest agenda for many years, more than 2 decades, I would say. But I think when we started free trade agreement with Singapore, we started very small. Very, I don't say easy, but it was a test case because Singapore was a relatively free country, as you know. Market opening and not a high barriers and so forth. Not exporting much of agriculture products. So it was not a very difficult one. But then we tried to develop ASEAN, the free trade agreement with the individual ASEAN countries. And then we turned into Japan-ASEAN free trade. And also China was doing the same things, more or less, a little bit in a different way. Started largely from the trade on goods rather than on service. But we are trying to pursue the both, in terms of our comparative advantage and so forth. And then we also wanted to have agreement with Korean too, because we thought it appropriate to have a good agreement with Korea. That was there for the entire 2 decades, I would say. There was idea and studies, but all the time there was some lapse. Some of the barriers was rather political nature, I would say, not necessarily purely economic, although there were some oppositions from some specific industries, I would say. But on the whole, over the past 5 or 10 years, there was a move that we moved forward, especially when there was a good political environment to operate. When there was a bad political environment, it also affected some of the economic undertakings. So that's a reality of the region, to be frank. But having said it, back in 2010, I think there was an APEC meeting in Japan. And at the time, I think there was good agreement. And that relates to what Mireya said, that the agreement, what we will pursue FTAP, an entire Asia-Pacific trade agreement as a goal and a final goal. And in the process, I think there was agreement, every regional or sub-regional undertakings, whether that is TPP or ASEAN plus 6, ASEAN plus 3, or whatever. I mean, Japan, Korea, and China exercise too. All these smaller, orbits could be eventually emerged into larger framework of free trade. I think that was a good agreement that included countries like China. And so on the whole, in terms of notion, I think including the United States, we are all committed as a political agreement that we will pursue the entire Asia-Pacific free trade. Now, having said it, it is also obvious that when you discuss all this TPP, I don't say that this was completely dominated by the United States, but it was studied by small nations, as you know, countries like New Zealand, which is doing a great job. And United States participated lately, and then we decided to participate. So the TPP itself is developing, and now the Canada and Mexico are in there. And the question is that, as Amelia said it, could this TPP exercise be competing with RCEP or whatever? I think in terms of time frame, it is obvious that if the consensus target of TPP participating country is to get this done in early timing of this year, I think the ambitions of RCEP is sometime the end of next year, year 2015, I think. And the ambitions of trilateral, Japan, Korea, and China, it is the end of 2014, so the end of this year. So they have some different time frame as a target. And if you look at the substance of the negotiations, we have to admit that this TPP is more comprehensive in terms of covering new rules. And although, in terms of what need to be covered and negotiated, they are still subject in both, trilateral and RCEP. I understand that, even this Japan and China are okay. They are still talking about market access modality and what kind of modality you need to define. Could there be any exceptions or deviations and so forth? Even on this RCEP. I understand that they are not even exchanging offer and request. So if you look at the current speed of the TPP negotiations, we are coming into the final phase. Although there are still some gap remained among the countries, that is basically the gap between the developing countries and developed countries in overall terms, especially on some of the rules, and also some of the market access issues between the developed countries and developing countries that would include developed versus developed countries like United States and Japan. And it is obvious that as we expect in some of the ministerial meeting, hopefully before the end of this month, I think the target should be that we should conclude the substantive negotiation around that time. And although in the final phase, it is always difficult to get this done, but I assume that there are good political wills of both United States, Japan, and other countries to try to get this done. That would require the more realistic and possibly flexible position taken by everybody else. Often the case in the final phase, you tend to think that the other's request is too much and you are offering too much. But I think we have to keep in mind that our overall objective of getting done is more important rather than having the ideal agreement at this stage. When the ideal is met, I would say, mostly in terms of getting the fundamental objective of the agreement. Now, so given that situation, I don't see here any problem, ideological problem, say, between this TPP and ASEAN plus 6. By the way, I understand that ASEAN 3 is already gone and it's submerged into ASEAN plus 6, one way or another. And there, I don't think that this is a game between the United States, the champion on the other side of the Pacific, and China on the other side of the Pacific. I mean, that's too much, I would say, journalistic. I don't say, sorry, I have to withdraw that one. Too much simplistic way of defining the issues. And yes, it is true that there are some differences of the position taken by the member participating country in RCEP and TPP. And for example, if you look at the some rule issues taken up in TPP, like government procurement and intellectual property and competition, and especially the role of the government. I mean the role of the government affiliated agencies and so forth. I would say that if there are some countries who have enormous challenges, especially in terms of changing the domestic economic and business structure in a way to open up its system, more harmonious in the other countries, that would require enormous energy and time. So for that reason, I would say that eventually all the countries in the region should be a part of this wider FTAP, and then why not all this merger of RCEP to TPP in the future. But on that stage, naturally, there is a gap in terms of rulemaking and the market access. And so I think then there has to be different kinds of negotiation to narrow the gap, obviously. So this RCEP would, I don't say will be a minor league, but there has to be some adjustment process between the two in the future. And that would give a very good time for a big country like China to adjust, to open its system more to the higher standard of rules. And I don't think that's easy. So this RCEP, depending on how much it would seek the high level of standards as we see in the ongoing TPP, I think that would give some idea the gap, and then how much it would take time, especially for each participating country to make their domestic adjustment. So I would stop here, and before concluding, I want to say our position and the Japanese perspective is that since we are a part of all this RCEP and TPP, and even Japan-China ROK exercise, we think that all the agreement and all the exercise are meaningful in its own way, and especially, for example, Japan-China ROK trilateral. I think if this could be done, this would be great, not only in terms of business and economy, but also be a good part of making the relationship among the three is a better one to pave the way for more exchange of people, not only business people, but also the more stake, I would say, to each other, and so that you don't have to quarrel so much. So that will mean that economic relationship and linkage would be a part of the safety net, so that each country need to have a good relationship. So for that reason, we welcome and appreciate a greater role of China and ROK in doing all this exercise. We welcome Chinese participation into TPP eventually, if we could do well in the ongoing RCEP negotiations. And I understand that Korea is also interested in TPP. That'd be also great. I mean, there shouldn't be any exclusion. There shouldn't be any notion that if you belong to one, trade exercise, you should be, excluding the others. That notion itself is not really modern, or even postmodern way of thinking. I would finish here, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. That was a very insightful presentation, and I think we all learned a great deal, and you certainly generated stimulating thoughts, and I think I know your time is limited, but I would like to take the opportunity to ask you a couple of questions, if I may. And I want to link precisely with your final point. And I think that most people in this room and a great deal of people watching events have become very worried, have watched with great concern the deterioration of relations between China, Japan, and South Korea because of historical and territorial issues. However, as you were pointing out, these three countries are also collaborating in many ways in the area of trade negotiations, not only through RCEP, but also through the trilateral China-Japan-Korea FTA. So you could make the case that trade agreements are actually the bright spot in Northeast Asia relations. And my question to you is, do you think there are chances that these effort at collaboration, at thinking about deepening economic interdependence, could have broader spillover effects that go beyond, benefits in making it possible for business people to travel and so forth, the more technical aspects of a trade agreement, to actually improve the diplomatic climate among these countries? Or should we expect that we will have the usual pattern of compartmentalization? So you have the hot economics and the cold politics. Which do you think might be the most likely scenario?
All right. That's a very interesting question. To put it a very simple way, I think to have a deeper economic ties and relationship is a necessary element of the good relationship. And if you don't have close and deep economic and business partnership, people don't have interest, to be frank, not much interest. So it's great to have good economic transactions and across the border. But if you could ask, is that sufficient for the good relationship? The answer is no. I think obviously it has to go beyond the pure economic and business enterprises. And in having a good relationship, you have to both have a good working relationship, both on the political and even defense and security relationship. And that's a challenge we are facing. And this place is not necessarily to address that question. It's a heavy agenda today. But let me say this, in spite of some of the problem we have today, we had this problem before. And if you look back at the history, back in 1960s, 70s, huge problem. even 70s or 80s. And we have a history of overcoming these difficulties. I have worked in foreign service for 40 years. It's long years. So I have been the vicissitude of the relationship, you know, whether it is our relationship with ROK or China. And there was a good time and bad time. And there was time that nobody was speaking much. There was a horrible time, you know. So I'm trying to say that at this moment, people tend to think that where we are in the worst, you know, situation after the war. I don't think that way. If you look at the exchange of the people, and lots of people come and go, and you know, for example, from ROK, Korean. Today, there are 5 million people going back and forth a year. Look at the number of the figures, say 10 or 20 years ago, it's very small. That was because there was opening up the country and even cultural exchanges. So in terms of a time frame, I think we are getting better. But at this moment, we are a little bit like that. So you might criticize me. I'm not offering any basis of getting better in the future. But I think the important point is that if people think that we're getting into more confrontations and tension, people think that way. That itself is dangerous. I mean, if you look at the Japanese economy, one of the reasons why we are stuck, say, over the 2 decades, is that we are too much, you know, overshadowed by the mentality that we can't grow. But I think mentality matters. I mean, you know, as I said to you in my remarks, simply the leadership, great leadership, you know, telling the people that we need to reform, we need to change, and that applies to every country, not simply one individual country. Every country has to go for the reform, whether it is political or economics. And I think if the 3 countries to do that together without too much blaming each other, and that would help more the environment to operate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Sasae. One final question, if I may. And I want now to point to an area where China and Japan actually have agreed, and that is that in the past, China and Japan had different proposals for East Asia regional integration, China endorsing ASEAN +3 format, Japan thinking more broadly about ASEAN +6 to bring India, Australia, New Zealand also into these negotiations. And now these 2 countries, together with ASEAN, seem to have put this difference aside and have endorsed RCEP. So could you elaborate as to how was it possible to reach agreement and make RCEP then the vehicle in which all these perspectives could converge?
Yeah. I think this is also related to some of the political environment. As you know, the ASEAN developed its own free trade agreement, and both China and ROK and Japan had their own relationship with ASEAN. And also they were getting together, I mean, every year. ASEAN +3, there is a meeting, ministerial meeting going on some years. And then there was another forum to be developed in parallel with this. That is the ASEAN +6. That's the East Asia Summit, as you know. And this RCEP is not totally, you know, the same as East Asia Summit, but there was the new membership like Australia, New Zealand, and even India and Russia and the United States. So I think there was a growing interest of some of the East Asian Summit participants to be also linking up with this ASEAN plus 3 exercise. And so there was this parallel way of moving to ASEAN plus 6, ASEAN plus 3, and it was true that China was preferring to have this ASEAN plus 3 as a priority. But on the other hand, Japan and other countries like Australia and New Zealand were trying to develop this ASEAN plus 6 of the sort. So obviously, initially there were conflicting process, but eventually, I think as you look at the value of the exercise, it's mostly overlapping. So I think it was wise. I mean, you don't have to do the same stuff, and just for the small difference of the membership. So I think it was wise to go for the RCEP rather than simply limiting your sphere of negotiations to ASEAN plus 3. And so I think there is a reason for having this RCEP to be a leading exercise of the region, making ASEAN and continue to be a central part of the exercise.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. This has been a delightful opportunity to exchange ideas and to learn from your insights. I know your time is very limited, so I would like to ask the audience to please join me in thanking the Ambassador for delivering the keynote this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to move to the next part of the program, where we're going to have the expert panel. And we are really very fortunate to have truly authoritative experts working in this issue. I think if you Google the topics of East Asian regionalism, Asia-Pacific regionalism, the names that will appear are very much the people that are going to make the presentations today. So these are the people that give the expert commentary and they write the leading articles and books on the topic. And I feel very fortunate personally that they have agreed to come from near and also from very far to provide this opportunity for an exchange of ideas. So I'm going to introduce them very briefly. The bios are available in the website. And I'm going to introduce them in the order in which I will ask them, each one of them, to come and give their presentation from the podium. And after all the presentations are over, then we're all going to come to the table, and then we'll have the Q&A for everybody. So our presenters today are Sanchita Basu Das, who is lead researcher of the ASEAN Studies Center and fellow at the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies in Singapore. Takashi Terada, professor at Doshisha University in Kyoto, Japan. Yuling Zhang is professor and director of the Division of International Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Claude Barfield is resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. So, Sanchita, if I can ask you to come, please.
Distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to all of you. It's really an honor to be here with all of you at the Brookings Institute, and I would like to thank Dr. Solis and her colleagues for inviting me for this event. The topic of discussion today is the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership are the competing or complementary forces for economic integration. And I'll try to give an ASEAN perspective on this. But before moving to RCEP or TPP, I would like to talk briefly about the ASEAN's own regional economic integration initiative. ASEAN started its main economic integration initiative in 1992, and the key rationales were, like in the post-Cold War era, the region realized that having an economic cohesion will give it a sense of regional identity. It will also, the economic cooperation will also bring in greater bargaining power for the region in the international community, especially against, say, China, India, Japan, Korea, or the US. Of course, there were developments in the other parts of the world, like regionalism is gaining strength in North America or in EU, and the talks in the WTO has been slowing down. Besides this, the smaller developing countries in Asia realize, like, if you're negotiating among a small group of countries, that can ensure you some flexibility and can offer some degree of protectionism so as to satisfy the domestic constituencies. So ASEAN started his regionalism process with the ASEAN Free Trade Area and subsequently widened it to include the ASEAN, the services sector liberalization and the investment sector measures. And later, after the 97-98 crisis, the AFTA and the AFAS, that's the services sector liberalization and the ASEAN investment area initiative, got subsumed under the ASEAN's bigger vision of ASEAN economic community. But despite its effort of economic integration for the last two decades, the economic integration in ASEAN is said to be limited. The last AEC scorecard, the ASEAN Economic Community scorecard, was published by the ASEAN Secretariat in March 2012. And in that scorecard, it said the ASEAN countries have implemented around 68 to 70% of their targets for the first 4 years of the implementation. The number was updated later to 77.5% in 2013. Besides its own integration initiative, ASEAN has been also pursuing FTA negotiation with Australia, New Zealand, China, India, Japan, and South Korea. This is because besides ASEAN's own intra-regional trade, which is around 25%, the extra-region trade with China or Japan was equally important. Besides, these 5 ASEAN +1 FTAs were also enacted to strategically place ASEAN as a hub of FTA in the broader Asian region. However, these ASEAN +1 FTAs were signed and negotiated at different points of time. Each ASEAN +1 FTA differs in terms of the way of negotiation and economic coverage. And there are studies which have narrated that while the liberalization under trade in goods for some of the FTAs is not high enough, the trade in services have only very small WTO plus components, and trade facilitation remains generic for most of these ASEAN +1 FTAs. And besides this ASEAN-wide, the region-wide FTAs, the members of ASEAN were also pursuing the bilateral free trade agreements with distant partners. Although they have the market access as one of the key reasons, they also have many political reasons for pursuing these FTAs. And so the political reasons being like they would like to cement a long-term strategic relationship with say major powers and the major trading partners. And the individual ASEAN governments were also eager to raise their overall diplomatic status by pursuing trade diplomacy. And again, it has been observed that these FTAs are different in nature and the scope. And they could range from very limited FTAs on trade in goods to highly comprehensive ones. These FTAs have a variety of rules of origin that have been applied or being currently negotiated. And there is a lot of overlap among the FTA partners of ASEAN and the individual member countries. Like Singapore has pursued FTA with Australia on the bilateral, and it's also a member of ASEAN-Australia Free Trade Agreement. So all these led to increasing concern that the absence of a common framework across these FTAs may negate the benefits for the region. On the other hand, there could be some negative implications like higher cost of doing business in the region. So realizing these challenges of multiple FTAs while acknowledging the benefit of a comprehensive region-wide agreement, a decision was reached in November 2011 to establish a free trade agreement involving 16 countries. That's the 10 ASEAN member countries, China, Japan, Korea, India, Australia, and New Zealand under the framework of Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. Objective of RCEP is to attain a comprehensive and mutually beneficial economic partnership agreement that is WTO consistent and transparent and is expected to involve deeper engagement between ASEAN and its FTA partners. During the November 2012 summit, the leaders of ASEAN Plus 6 endorsed the guiding principles that listed 8 negotiation areas. A key feature of the document is that it mentioned that the agreement will give due consideration to the different levels of development among the members. The 16 member countries decided to launch the negotiation in May 2013 in Brunei, with likelihood of completion by the end of 2015, when ASEAN is also going to announce its economic community at the same time. So till January 2014, 3 rounds of negotiation have been concluded in RCEP. What are the benefits of RCEP? RCEP, as led by ASEAN, is expected to entrench its centrality in a wider Asia-Pacific regional architecture. And this was challenged amidst the rapid pace of regional economic integration arrangement that was evolving in the region, including the US-led Trans-Pacific Partnership that was announced during the 2011 APEC summit. RCEP was expected to demonstrate ASEAN's leadership in bringing together its own 10 members and external partners for economic growth, development, and harmonization. RCEP is based on the ASEAN Plus formula and was viewed as a good compromise between the East Asia Free Trade Agreement, which was based on the ASEAN Plus 3 formula and was favored by China, and the Comprehensive Economic Partnership in East Asia, that's the CPEA, which was based on ASEAN Plus 6 formula and was favored by Japan. And economically, if RCEP was successfully done by 2015, it's going to constitute 32% of the world GDP and will cover about half of the world population. But negotiating an agreement like RCEP is not without challenges. RCEP is the first of its kind and has no precedents to emulate. It involves 3 different dynamics among 16 members. The 10 ASEAN members, of course, they have been pursuing their own economic integration process since 1992. ASEAN and FTA partners, they have been working on the FTA since 2000, but the major problem is with the 6 FTA partners who doesn't have comprehensive FTAs with each other. And in this category, I will say the China, Japan, Korea FTA assumes special interest because these 3 northeastern states account for a dominant share of GDP and trade in East Asia, and a successful establishment of RCEP depends on the conclusion of the CJK FTA. However, we keep on listening to various political conflicts, so there are again doubts on whether the CJK agreement will be completed by the end of this year. Besides that, RCEP includes India, which is viewed as an rising economic power in the region, but its position in multi-party agreement, trade agreement, remains very conservative. So that also involves difficulties in negotiation. RCEP negotiation is also challenged by the differences in developmental stages and accordingly differences in interest among the negotiating partners. The flexibility clause built into the RCEP framework could be a boon or bane for RCEP. It could break the deadlocks during negotiation, but it could also lead to a low quality of FTA. So pursuing harmonization, consensus, and flexibility at the same time could result in a lowest common denominator rule. As RCEP was announced at a time when TPP also launched its negotiation with 9 Asia-Pacific economies, this led to a lot of debate on the similarities or differences between these agreements. Like I mentioned, RCEP is said to cover 32% of world GDP and around 50% of world population. For TPP, it constitutes around 38% of world GDP and 11% of world population. This is a table, I hope you can see it, that gives broadly some of the similarities and differences of RCEP and TPP. So RCEP is led by ASEAN and is born out of the ASEAN +1 FTAs. It is based on open accession clause, where membership can be expanded later as the signed FTA with ASEAN. Negotiations started in 2013 with expectation of conclusion by 2015. TPP, on the other hand, is led by the US in line with its foreign policy objective of pivot towards Asia. It's born out of P4 agreement. APEC countries have been encouraged to join the negotiation, and negotiations started in 2011, but it missed the deadline of December 2013 of completion. For characteristics, objective for both RCEP and TPP, I would say, are almost the same, but TPP includes more areas of negotiation. TPP agreement includes more areas of cooperation compared to RCEP currently. But there are concerns, like RCEP building on the ASEAN way, building on the ASEAN's principle of ASEAN way, and mentioning like differential treatment depending on level of members' development could contribute to slow progress and may also have a low quality of agreement. ASEAN +1 FTAs have different features and are at different stages of implementation, which could add difficulties in negotiating the agreement. TPP, on the other hand, is said to be a gold standard 21st century FTA and addresses next generation issues. But we have countries in TPP like Malaysia and Vietnam, and it remains to be seen how these countries satisfies its implementation process once they conclude the agreement. Of course, TPP does not include China and India, and TPP may divide ASEAN, said to divide ASEAN as all are not participating in TPP, and that may undermine ASEAN centrality. I'll go very briefly on this. The strategic role of TPP. The TPP agreement is a key component for the US pivot or rebalancing strategy towards Asia. For the Asian economies, TPP, the US presence in the region through TPP is a comforting factor, especially for the countries who have apprehensions from rise of China. TPP is viewed largely as a manifestation of discussion on CPI and EA FTA since 2001, and this picked up momentum after the 2008 crisis. TPP could also be viewed as a consequence of a slow progress in APEC that the US has been using as a vehicle to maintain its economic activities in Asia. Last, like our Dr. Solis was mentioning it, there were two views on TPP, like whether TPP is a vehicle to contain China or not. Like for the group of people who have been saying TPP is a vehicle to contain China, was saying because TPP has features that's difficult for China to comply with. Or TPP will divert attention of the economies who are also involved in the China-led economic cooperation in Asia. But on the other hand, I will say like this group of people could be refuted saying like TPP was not originally an US initiative. It grew out of the P4 agreement among Brunei, Singapore, New Zealand, and Chile in 2005. And US joined in the P4 agreement much later in 2008. And moreover, TPP cannot contain China as other TPP members who participates in Asia's production network with China may not like it. So we can argue it in both ways, whether TPP is a vehicle to contain China or not. As for the RCEP, we heard from Ambassador also, RCEP came up as a compromise between EA FTA, which the process started as early as 2001, and but nothing, after the feasibility study in 2004, nothing happened on the East Asia Free Trade Agreement. In the meantime, Japan also proposed its CPR, which is the ASEAN +6 formula in 2006. A study was done, but again, nothing happened. It was only in August 2011, EAS economic ministers welcomed the Chinese and Japanese joint initiative on speeding up the establishment of EA, FTA, and CPR. And in the same time, ASEAN proposed its own model of ASEAN-centric regional FTA, the RCEP. The strategic part of RCEP I have already described. I will conclude by giving some thoughts on the possibility of an FTAP. Of course, there are a lot of discussion that an enlarged TPP or an enlarged RCEP will lead to the creation of an FTAP. And FTAP, whether we use the TPP or the RCEP pathways, if only possible if it's endorsed by the big powers like US, China, Japan, Korea. But the most heard criticism of FTAP is that it will never happen because of the political conflicts. Moreover, in their current forms, nature and membership of TPP and RCEP vary significantly. So both the negotiations are facing very challenges at the moment, and looks to be difficult to conclude. Currently, there are also uncertainties on which of the two tracks, we keep on saying TPP and RCEP, will help to shape the future regional or the global trading architecture, or whether they will be converged in the long run. We don't know these answers. So it is important to keep both US and China interested in the future of the regional trading system. Although it might be true that a high-quality trade agreement would yield greater gains, it may also deter new members like China from participating in such trading bloc. So with this thing in mind, leaders and policymakers must carefully balance the depth and scope of such agreements. Another concern is over competing forces between the two agreements of TPP and RCEP. This tendency may make it difficult for the agreements to converge later. Thus, while negotiating, policymakers need to have a vision for the future. They should seek for common standards and provisions that could be consolidated going forward. And lastly, the US and China must keep aside the differences and should take more active common positions on trade cooperation leading to an FTAP. However, in the short run, it is necessary to ensure that these two mega trade deals that are being negotiated do not increase the business cost in the Asia-Pacific region. Thank you.
Very good afternoon. My name is Takashi Terada from Dosha University in Kyoto, Japan. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the Mireya and also Brookings team for kindly inviting me to this quite significant and timely workshop. I was actually sitting in this table more than 2 years ago, December 2011, and a topic is very similar, TPP and Japan. So when I got the invitation from Brookings, and I thought, wow, I could use the same PowerPoint which I used 2 years ago, so it must be cheesecake. But of course, 2 years time span was not necessarily so long, but actually a lot of things have taken place. So that means I need to rewrite every page of PowerPoint which I used 2 years ago. Actually, I didn't use any page which I used 2 years ago. Again, Ambassador Sasae already provided the very good overlapping sort of the problems between the TPP and RCEP. Even he added the CJK, China, Japan, Korea, FTA issues to such a complex, the situation of the regional integration programs in Asia Pacific. So again, well, I don't need to speak a lot, particularly to say something from the Japanese perspective. But again, I'm not a government officer. I'm simply teaching one of the private universities in Japan. So my view is certainly based on the Japanese perspective. Again, I cannot avoid. But however, it's not necessarily the government views. So, for example, I'm not necessarily taking a similar views which the Ambassador Sasae mentioned, here and on some of the issues. Okay, let me start with the mapping here. This is always the first page I used for giving a speech over the last year or so, even including my own lecture in the university, just to provide the basics of thinking of regional integration. Well, basics is you needed to be there. Otherwise, you couldn't get anything. So this map just shows who are in, who are out. And again, my ASEAN colleague just provided the RCEP histories and etc. So I don't need to provide that. But the point is, again, our own country, Japan, I just put my country at the center with red color so that everyone can pay attention to that. That's more important to me. And the blue cards, we have 3 blue cards. It's round, started from the ASEAN, 10 member states, ASEAN plus 3, 13 states, including Japan, China, South Korea, and ASEAN plus 6, India, Australia, New Zealand added, actually in the East Asian Summit. But we have a different one, square one, which actually is not necessarily based upon the ASEAN template, FTA template, or frameworks. First, TPP, yes. Just penetrating into the round ones. And this means ASEAN is actually divided by TPP member countries and not. And also CJK, China, Japan, Korea FTAs, the square one. And this is also negotiating the framework for the integration, including investment treaty and etc. So I think that this is the beginning. And to consider the RCEP and TPP, whether they are converging or even competing, etc. But next, chart is describing some of the political points for considering the differences or similarities among the 3 regional frameworks in which Japan has been participating. But I think there's several key areas. Let me say who actually leads. Again, previous speaker already mentioned TPP is actually based upon the American FTA template. For example, environmental labor clauses. Japan had, for example, 12 currently, I guess, the bilateral FTAs. But environmental and labor clauses had never been put in there. So it's very American, or maybe NAFTA type of the institution agendas. And RCEP, well, I say no state led. Well, ASEAN can be said to be leading, but ASEAN is sort of the 10 member countries collective institution, and in which the different countries have also different perspectives and approaches. Even Singapore, for example, is a free state and a very rich country, and whether Singapore can have a similar the issues and approaches compared with, for example, Laos and Myanmar, well, very different. So, but it's ASEAN-based. Any provision is based upon conditions or terms of so-called ASEAN plus 1 FTA. But actually, if you don't have the ASEAN plus 1 FTA, you cannot join the RCEP at the moment. So United States doesn't have the FTA with ASEAN yet. So the US is not qualified to join RCEP, although I don't think the US is currently interested in joining RCEP. And the next one is the target year. Well, initially, TPP was set to finalize the basic agreement on the issues and agendas by the end of last year, but already passed. So I put to the April 2014, this year. This is when Mr. Obama is coming to Japan. So obviously, he is meeting with our Prime Minister, Mr. Abe. So this is probably the point for both leaders to have sort of the chance to exercise the influence on pushing the TPP, particularly bilateral negotiations forward. This is a prerequisite for the whole process of the TPP negotiations conclusions. And the final one is the market access negotiations. Again, the TPP is, as many people believe, 21st century and new agendas, and that's true. But market access, it's basics for any sort of regional integration or FTAs. And interestingly, many people, including Japan, have been so much interested in the multilateral framework because the rules, which are actually very different depending on the bilateral or FTAs or trading arrangement could be probably unified or multilateralized so that rules could be much more simplified. For example, rule of origins. But the US didn't take this kind of approach in terms of the market access. Bilateral approach is still sort of the framework which the US has been pursuing. Again, no other countries, as I mentioned before, US-led institution, right? No choice but follow it. So, as I mentioned later, probably in the end, 50 or 60 bilateral small agreements among 12 current TPP member countries could be produced eventually in terms of the market access, which means different rules. For the one who have now water, but different FTA have probably different tariff ratio, although there's a very same product. So again, the companies, they are users, not government officers, probably would be confused, which FTA could be utilized to export, their own products. So again, but RCEP, again, as Ambassador mentioned, RCEP CGK are very still in a primitive stage of negotiations. They have only 3 or 4 negotiations and modality setting stage. That's why I put some of the not sure, because they are not necessarily discussing this kind of issues yet compared with the TPPs. But it's already decided that the RCEP decided to take so-called common tariff ratio, which means multilateralization of the tariff ratios, same tariff ratio on the same product, and simplification of the rules, even regulatory rules and etc., could be probably pursued in RCEP. That would be quite attractive for the users, which means multinational companies. So again, these are sort of I think the 2 or 3 major key frameworks and features for the comparison between the TPP and the RCEP. And this is also very significant for considering the Japanese interest and approaches to the TPP. Well, as I mentioned, TPP's key features, bilateralism and multilateralism. So this was sort of the expression of the ROO programs. Well, just really expansion of the countries that the subject of cumulative origin. Of course, if you have computer here, a lot of parts are assembled, but which parts are originated from? Particularly Japanese companies use a different country for different the production of their parts, and assembled probably in China or some other the countries in which the relatively cheap labor are available. So of course it's very difficult to identify origins of the products. But if the multilateral approaches to this rule of origin rules are actually set up, where it's produced doesn't matter. It's a TPP product. So parts, even the finished products, could be quite easily exchanged among the TPP member countries. But again, TPP didn't take this kind of approach, as I mentioned before. So again, as I wrote, just the last point, I think that this bilateral approaches on market access negotiations might reduce the TPP's usefulness. I said greatly, but greatly is conditional, because from a Japanese viewpoint, Japanese companies set up the factories, for example, in Mexico, in order to export their own finished product to the United States using NAFTA, even Canada maybe. So in this case, using NAFTA, Canada, US, and Mexico's production network, supply chain the networks could be established in the 3 countries, just because of the NAFTA's the common rules. But the point is, whether Chile and Peru, another 2 nations of TPP countries, could be actually incorporated into production networks and the supply chain networks. Well, again, I'm no expert on the Latin American economies, but I just checked with the guy in Japan who said not necessarily true. So Japanese companies, the particular manufacturers and automobiles and etc., try to set up the supply chain networks mainly in East Asian side rather than Pacific side. So in this case, if some other ASEAN member countries, like Philippines, for example, or South Korea already showed an interest in joining TPP, are added, I think the attractiveness of TPP would be greatly increased. However, bilateral approaches to TPP on market access would reduce quite greatly the usefulness of this. So this is sort of the, TPP's dilemma. Also, US is sticking bilateralism in terms of the US-Japan. Again, two major participants in the TPP. Already 1 minute, wow. Okay, let me show the probably most significant issue. This is the diagram illustrating the sort of the agriculture product Japan never liberalized in any framework of the trade negotiations. That's why it's 89.7%. This is the current level of the highest level of the Japanese liberalization in any FTAs. Never go beyond the 90% because of these products which Japan never touched upon. That's why we have 7, for example, ASEAN bilateral FTAs. Liberalization ratio, Japan is actually lower than that offered by ASEAN individual nations, despite those ASEAN nations being considered to be developing countries. So this is Japan's Achilles. But, of course, TPP is basically saying all items should be liberalized, which means tariff zero. First time Japan felt pressure to touch upon these agriculture products. And which items could be eliminated is actually illustrated by this diagram. Rice, sugar, and dairy products, and etc. And the US actually has been targeting these agriculture products in bilateral negotiations. But interestingly, we thought rice may be the most difficult agenda or issue for Japan to be touching upon. But the US didn't necessarily requesting Japan to eliminate tariffs on rice. As I wrote, but again, this is my guessing, because Japan's so-called minimum access rice imports, as I wrote here, more than half, nearly half of the foreign rice using this requirement under the Uruguay round is actually American-made. And in terms of wheat, 60% is actually made in America. And of course, dairy and sugar products, if you touched upon and liberalized in Japan, again, New Zealand, Australian dairy and sugar products also coming into Japan freely. That would be probably tough competition for the American sugar and dairy product producers. So again, no wonder why America is now picking up pork and beef. So this should be discussed next Monday, I heard, in Tokyo. And a USTR officer is coming to Tokyo before going to Singapore's TPP ministerial meeting. So I think it's quite a crucial point whether Japan is actually touching on pork and beef. Okay, sorry, again, I have already passed, and so I needed to stop. So give me 1 minute. I skipped the RCEP issues. Again, okay, let me touch on the issues which media addressed in the beginning of this meeting. TPP, RCEP, competing or converging. Again, from a Japanese perspective, I say for Japan, but it's not Japan, actually. I'm not representing Japan, but me, just one mere academics in Japan. But TPP is a rule-making cutting-edge mechanism, establishing more developed nation-oriented rules for trade investment together with the United States. So US actually expressed a quite strong desire for working together with Japan in an area, for example, intellectual property right, and Japan would be happy to work on that. However, I said in traditional elements still persistently remain. Bilateral and separate rule of origin still, exist, I mentioned. Also, agricultural liberalization as a dominant agenda, which was already, put in agenda 1970s and 80s, and got negotiations. Even Japan-US trade negotiation 1970s. So all the issues reduced the attractiveness of new approaches and issues. This is, I think, the TPP's problem to me. And RCEP. Again, RCEP is sort of the market expansion mechanism. Again, very traditional approach on any FTA, eliminating higher tariffs and non-tariff barriers in larger trading partners such as China, India, Indonesia, for example. 3 nations putting together 2.5 billion people market, but still maintaining higher tariffs. So if RCEP would work together, helping in elimination of those barriers, that would be hugely important for Japanese trade expansion, traditional approach. So in this case, ASEAN centrality issues will not make the 21st agenda feasible, it seems to me. The point is, new issues is not something necessarily pursued by RCEP. Such a traditional old issues could be a quite attractive point for RCEP from a Japanese viewpoint. However, I said before, the multilateral approaches has been employed, unlike the TPP in which the bilateralism has been pursued. That's actually also very significant, and particularly for the Japanese companies in joining or expanding regional supply chain networks in terms of using the advantage for exporting their own products freely. So from my viewpoint, they are not competing, probably not converging yet. They're very different. So we have to probably consider maybe third scenario, compared with the two scenarios which Emilia mentioned at the beginning. It's different. It's very different, the creator. So we should pursue and looking at these two frameworks quite differently with different purposes and aims. Thank you very much.
How to find mine? Okay, thank you.
You like to pick on, right?
Yeah, it's on the. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm a third speaker, try to make it differently, give some perspective from China scholars' view. Let me start from this RCEP, the RCEP. As we know that RCEP considered to be an integrated process of multi-layered 10+1s. That's origin from actually East Asia Vision Group recommendation for a long-term that effort for community. The three pillars of community, one is summit, later summit changed into the 10+6 East Asia Summit. The second is FTA, based on 10+3. The third one is the financial cooperation, based on the Japan's Asia Monetary Fund, and then turned to Chiang Mai Initiative, now come to a multilateralization of these bilateral swaps. So FTA is really considered to be one of the key approach for the East Asia integration. But after this recommendation of East Asia Vision Group, before 2000, only Japan, Singapore had a bilateral CEP, it's called, Close Economic Partnership. So China started this FTA from 2000 with ASEAN. It's a very gradual process, used 10 years. By 2010, finished this 10+1. But after China started 10+1, Japan, Korea followed, later Australia, New Zealand, and also India. So start from 2004, two things were discussed by the 10+3 cooperation mechanism. One is about summit. As I mentioned, summit turned to a different one. And the FTA and China proposed to chair the feasibility study. So this feasibility study started actually first led by China, and I was assigned as the chair of the expert group, and we finished the report in 2006, and later led by Korea, the called Phase 2 study. When finished the Phase 1 study, when I reported to 10+3 economic ministers, and Japan proposed a different approach that is called CEPA, Close Economic Partnership of East Asia. So Japan led another group, and from 2006 to 2009, and also I joined as a member of the team. So there was a divided view on how to formulate this, East Asia integration based on two different kind of recommendations. But fortunately, that's in 2010, and China, Japan together jointly proposed, made a joint initiative that let's encourage ASEAN to go ahead. So Ambassador mentioned that was the time when China, Japan had a good political relationship. So we had also the pressure by that time that from TPP. So U.S. started TPP in 2009, and then the TPP started, it seems, with the expanding members. So that's a give. Japan did not decide to join TPP yet. So they make China, Japan, came together to make a joint proposal to that's a new process that encourage ASEAN to make new decision. And also from ASEAN side, also felt the pressure from some members. 4 members joined the TPP. So it's really a threat to ASEAN's community building, economic community. So it's a lot of combined factors together that make this RCEP as a fact. And ASEAN made an initiative in 2011, and it was quickly supported by 10+6 that's countries. So that's as a new initiative. So people seems quickly forgot what the differences in the past. So start the new the process. I think that's where the RCEP. So partly as I mentioned, as a process of integration in East Asia, partly as a reflection, the pressure from the ASEAN and from TPP to the region and also to ASEAN. So, and RCEP, I think, if you see the guidelines made by ASEAN, but supported jointly, actually together, they announced, agreed by 16 countries, is identified as a modern, comprehensive, and multi-benefit FTA with higher level, I think, than current 5 10+1 FTAs. So that's basic. They call it a modern comprehensive. RCEP covers that 7 areas in that guideline: trading goods, trading service, investment, economic and technical cooperation, intellectual property. That's quite new to these existing 10+1s. Competition policy, also the new, and dispute settlement. They try to integrate different, ones, and other issues. Rule of origin, of course, IOO surely is one. So now, currently, that's the discussion focusing on this, the 7 areas. The only thing is other issues probably will add on the list of a future negotiation. So RCEP seeks a different model and approach from TPP, that's surely. One, that is we have 5 10+1s. So the basic idea is try to put the 5+1s together. We had a study, comprehensive study, that is originally we tried to simply put 5+1s together, but the study shows it's very, very difficult, almost impossible. So actually, RCEP consider a new negotiation, but considering all this what we agreed in the past. But we all understand, put these 16 countries together for higher level, comprehensive, is not an easy issue. So I, together with Rata-san from Japan and Australia, the others, so we, the two teams of EAFTA, 10+3, and CEPA, 16 countries, we got together last year, tried to find a way how to recommend a new approach for the negotiators. So the main recommendation created by us, that's a gradual process. So it's not like a TPP. The trading goods, for instance, the gradual process, for instance, almost a fully liberalized trading goods once they agreed in 2015. So trading, service, and investment later in the process. But they negotiate together, but with a different timetable. So other difficult issues like competition policy probably later, but also covered in the agreement. That's an experts' agreement, the ideas. And also have a comprehensive down payment in 2015. So that's different from 10+1, like China, ASEAN. We start from trading goods and service and investment and gradual within 10 years. That's not. The RCEP is different. Also one important recommendation by us that is that RCEP closely linked to the ASEAN economic community building and connected what they agreed on. So actually, to some extent, is an ASEAN economic community extension to the others. So that is make ASEAN easier. So that is expert view, but actually the real discussion is some different, I think. Until now, the basic formula that is negotiation between ASEAN and 6 countries. So ASEAN as a group, and the other 6 as a group. So that is the approach. So some said RCEP is led by China, so that's not true. Initiated by, actually is led by ASEAN, but it's not fully led by ASEAN. Actually, it's find a way how to combine ASEAN and 6 other countries together. And that means ASEAN have this agreed one formula, and then negotiated with one consolidated views among the 6 parties. So until now, this is the basic way for negotiation. So first round started on May 10th, 2013, and third one just finished in the end of January of this year. So now come to the third one, already come to the modality. As mentioned by Ambassador, we are still, discuss in the early stage and the modality. But that's not simply discuss the modality, but each side already discussed what they can put on the table or what they can offer. So the fourth round will be held in April. By that time, as I understand, they should agree on the basic framework. And since economic ministers meeting to be held in August, so they have to report what they negotiated and agreed on. According to the information based on the previous 3 rounds, so ASEAN expect a gradual, flexible process. India with very low commitments. Japan expect a high-level, comprehensive, but with special exceptions. Probably that's what make Japan very hard within TPP. They try to have more flexibility within RCEP because the structure of two markets are quite different. Here in RCEP, we have more agriculture problems probably for Japan. The key consensus based on the, I think, a smart compromise. I call it smart compromise that you have to find a way because it's so different among the 16 countries. For instance, India has not committed a high-level FTA with anyone yet. So if make RCEP as a high one, high-level, comprehensive, that's a very, very big challenge for India. For China, I think later probably I will discuss it, but I'll leave it here. The challenges, I think, the two basic ones, negative list on service. We agreed generally in principle, but until now, ASEAN has not agreed in service yet. Pre-national treatment, I think probably finally they can agree on among all 16 members. So the challenges, I think, is we have to consider TPP effects because there are five TPP. Actually seven TPP members. So what they request, what they agreed in TPP, they will request a lot from non-TPP members in RCEP. So this is still in the early stage of negotiation. So it's hard to if you see TPP negotiation process, that's come down to the final. They have to be more flexible, and it's quite different from beginning what they expect. Come to China's stand, I think China's FTA strategy started from 2000 after joining WTO with the initiative China-ASEAN FTA. So until now, China has concluded FTAs only with developing economies, is ASEAN as a group, Pakistan, Chile, Peru, Costa Rica, Trinidad, Tobago. So small developing economies, developed economies, Switzerland, New Zealand, and Iceland. Also, we have internal arrangements with Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan. So until now, that's what China concluded. You see, all developing, small, and less competitive. So experience that's gradual, less competitive, and special. So that's two key features for China, what has concluded the FTAs until now. So China has met difficulties in negotiating FTAs with large developing economies like Australia on service. Large developing economies like India with a negative response, and a special group, Gulf Council on chemical sector. So reasons China is competitive, that is based on the FDI-based export. Local sector, especially service sector, are very weak. China has an export center, competitive trade surplus with developing markets. So they are reluctant to make further liberalization of the markets, market access. So US, EU refuse to accept China's market status. But however, China has negotiated bilateral investment treaty with US and EU, and possibly after this, FTA with them in the future. But more importantly, China has made new commitments on adopting the principle of negative list approach and pre-national treatment. That is unbelievable. Before, as experts will advise the government for many times, but fortunately now they agreed on also put in its new reform agenda. And FTA has been as a central strategy in the reform agenda that put in the document. Now we have a CK FTA, hopefully conclude quickly and with great progress. CJK and RCEP are under negotiation. So consider TPP. I think China is really considered a serious challenge to China, both because U.S. strategy against a rising China. We probably use the rising China as a competitor. New rules relating to domestic reform. That's depending on, there is a question, is the domestic reform first or the commitment first? So that is why it comes to the divided view. The early participation group of TPP, they consider the outside pressure as a key issue to press that domestic reform. Wait and see that group, they consider China come to this time and should get to reform first and have enough pressure and ability to reform. So official view, an open attitude, unlike that when TPP started, but very cautious whether join or not. I accept. But lastly, APEC, I think the previous speakers also mentioned, Ambassador mentioned, and APEC is still a key institution bridging Asia-Pacific. BOGO goal remains as a goal, but no vehicle. So the question is whether TPP as a leading vehicle. If China joins and the others join, and maybe, but is this question still there? And TPP plus RCEP, some recommendation based on the two mega agreements, we start new ones. But also FTAP, as the ambassador mentioned from 2010, leaders mentioned again and again. The last year, APEC's leaders meeting make it in a statement very strongly. So this year, the question is whether China, how to put this FTAP this year. I think probably China continue to push this as a future goal, and hopefully this year we can set up a study group or working group to consider the recommendation in the future. That's probably the best approach rather than based on the different diversified, because the Asia-Pacific, if you consider U.S. economic recovery and emerging, that East Asia market challenges. So is how to bring Asia-Pacific still the key. So today I read the news of this Pacific Alliance, 4 countries in Latin America. They have signed agreement and approach to Asia-Pacific and to Asia. So this considers Asia-Pacific is still a matter. Thank you. I stop here.
Mr. Terada said that he could have used some notes that he had from some years ago, and actually until quite recently I could have probably done the same thing in terms of what we would go over. I want to focus just on mostly on the United States, and then some comments, particularly some in reaction to comments that a Chinese speaker made on RCEP. But in I'd like to spend the first part of what I'm talking about really in events over the last week in the United States, and tie what the political changes here or potential changes back to the negotiations and the juxtaposition of how RCEP and TPP may move. Until a week ago, in fact, a year or so ago here in Brookings, we had something about RCEP and TPP and whether they would compete. And my point at the time was, well, they're going to pass each other. After all, RCEP was just a concept at the time. TPP was well into negotiations. And my thinking, and in fact my thinking until quite recently, was that, well, we'll know one way or the other with the TPP. It will succeed or fail in 2013 or 2014. We will know why it failed or what it couldn't do. And so they won't really compete with each other because the RCEP will be farther down the road. I think the situation has changed in the United States, and I'm going to be speculative now because these things have just happened. And that goes back to the situation that has recently occurred in terms of the President and the Congress, Democrats, Republicans, and the Trade Promotion Authority. Mr. Obama, in his State of the Union message, dutifully, and I would say he could have said more, but he said enough as far as I'm concerned about pushing both Trade Promotion Authority and the TPP. 24 hours later, the majority leader of the Democrats in the House told the President that he didn't want TPA and not to send it up. Now, we don't know what how this is going to work out in terms of Congress, but there are a couple of things that we may be moving toward, and I invite anyone in the audience who thinks it may go in a different direction to say that when I finish. And that is, in talking with people on the Hill and with the business community is always optimistic, so you get a little bit different, but the Hill staffers you talk about, I think we may very well be in a situation where the Trade Promotion Authority is put off until after the election, so that Congress will not move this year. Now, what does that mean? Well, it certainly means that our trading partners are going to have to do some rethinking. It also, this is where I get back to the TPP negotiations. We are moving, it's crunch time. We are moving they've blown through some deadlines, and I think there were reasons that they had deadlines that they knew they weren't going to make, but now I don't think you can defend the possibility of success if you don't succeed sometime in the next 3 to 6 months. That is, in something that you have that can be said that we are, if not totally there, we are there. And my own thinking has been, sometime in the late spring, early summer, you have to really get there. They're meeting for the first time since the events in the United States. I think it's next week or the week after in Singapore. How does this affect the TPP and the negotiations? Well, what we don't know is what has happened in the United States. How will it impact the other 11 nations in putting their final offers on the table? When you do not know whether the President of the United States will actually be given the authority by Congress. And I don't know yet whether or not this will back things up. It could very well be that the TPP is backed up because of what has happened in the TPA. So that while, at least until recently, I thought that you'd have a TPP and that would be the model, and then you could see what would happen to RCEP. And by the way, it's hard to know until you got there, let's say next January, if the TPP does succeed or has succeeded. A lot of what we talked about this morning in terms of RCEP might change, because with Japan, this is something I've thought before, but with Japan in, and assuming that we successfully conclude, and Korea has made a strategic decision clearly under President Park that they're really going to go forward with the TPP. And that's a big change for Korea before the last election. I remember talking with Taeho Park, the trade minister, a year and a half ago, who made the point correctly, we've got the chorus, we need to protect our investment in China. So the China, either a bilateral or a trilateral, is the key for us. For a variety of reasons that we can talk about, Mrs. Park has turned that around. The point is that if this had moved forward, or if it does move forward, I think you've really tipped the balance toward the regional economic architecture. While RCEP will still be important, you really have a big move in one direction as of January next year, let's say, or early next year, if it happened. Now that is very much up in the air. I guess the other two or three other points, and I will stop. One, just in terms of, there's been a lot of discussion of the approaches to negotiation, but I guess in my mind, the key difference, and I'll talk about the 21st century stuff also in a minute, the key difference is the RCEP, this whole business is building from the ground up, the whole business of flexibility, of special and differential treatment, and then one other big difference I'll come back to is obviously at the moment there's no way to add nations to the RCEP. That's not true with the TPP. It's a very different approach from the TPP, which if it's successful, I think, will go in the other direction in this sense. Everything will have to be on the table, or 95% will have to be on the table. Japan will not be allowed to take rice totally off the table. The United States will not be allowed to say in perpetuity, we're going to have this outrageous 25% tariff on trucks. But if the successful TPP will have everything on the table, but with enormous time frames to come into compliance with what the rule is. Even part of a lifetime, beyond my lifetime certainly, and to some of your lifetimes here. And that's a real difference, I think, in the way you actually, what the final agreement would look like. I would also say in passing I think Mr. Terada correctly pointed out the market access rules in the United States still has a very bad position on this. But there are two things to note. One, most of the rules, and I'm not defending rules of origin that we have in terms of the market access for a lot of the basic stuff, but most of the things in terms of the high end, in terms of electronics, don't really affect the key supply chains. For a decade or longer, as Richard Baldwin, economists in Europe and others have pointed out, the companies don't pay any attention. If they're small, they just pay the 1% or 0.5% of tariff. This is not to say that this is not important, but the kind of goods that you were talking about in terms of textiles or shoes or the other basic, or dairy or something like that. The other difference, I think, and here I'm sticking with the TPP, is that if you look at the framework of the negotiations, the key negotiation is going to be between, and it's not just the United States, you've got Japan now, Korea will not be in time, but other more advanced economies, New Zealand, Australia, have their own interests here. Between the 21st century issues, and let me just take it from the United States point of view, what the United States is asking in state-owned enterprises are health and safety, or intellectual property, or other so-called inside-the-border issues, trading off against the more traditional issues that I just talked about in terms of 20th or 19th century, such as I say, textiles or shoes or dairy or cotton or sugar. And it's that juxtaposition that I think is the larger framework. And the other thing that I'm asked all the time is, what is the toughest issue in the TPP? Is it intellectual property? Is it health and safety? Is it state-owned enterprise, regulatory reform, that sort of thing? I think that's the wrong way to look at it. When you get to either in the spring or summer, if things work out better, or next year, I think the key is, from the point of view of the U.S. Trade Representative or the Japanese Trade Ministry or the Korean Trade Ministry, is what is the package? What are we getting versus what we're having to trade off? And how can we defend that in terms of either in the United States, our Congress, or the American public? And so it's the totality of what you give up to what you get. And you have to have, this is nothing new about this negotiation, by the way, in this sense. You've got to be able to get enough so that you can go home and defend it, whether your home is in Tokyo or whether it's in Washington. So those are that I think is the differences and the points I made with the TPP. Just one final thing, and then I will quit. I've got some other stuff, but let's just go to the questions. One, I am really, whatever's happening in the United States, I am quite skeptical of the numbers, and with all due respect to others who've spoken here, about the RCEP. I'm skeptical about the Asian Economic Community coming to anything like what you would call a completion by the end of 2015, and I'll come back with a footnote there from what our Chinese friends said. And I'm certainly skeptical about the ability to pull all this together in an ASEAN plus 6 in any time soon. I'm going to move in, not end, but make a almost final smart-ass remark. I guess my reaction is any agreement that has both Indonesia and India in it is not going to go very far, very fast. This is I don't mean to insult anyone, but the political situation is not the same. But the final point I made, and this was really eye-opening to me from our Chinese speaker, and I know you were talking just about the experts group, but the other thing that's very difficult is that if the RCEP moves in the way that was described here, it's going to be hard to know what's success or failure. I mean, that group of issues that stretches out to 2025 means I don't know how we decide next year or the year after whether there is going to be or has been a successful conclusion. So the very fuzziness of the negotiations, which signals the inability in my mind, and the United States has the same inability and sensitivities, the inability for key nations in the RCEP grouping actually to move forward. Makes it very difficult, however, to access. I'll just leave it there. Sorry, I just cut all my notes and just went ahead with the time I had. Okay.
Thank you, everybody. 10 minutes, and I think there's a lot on the table, and I know that you have been very patient, and I want to turn it to you right away. I just want to make a comment. I think that as I was listening to these very different presentations, there was one common theme that was coming in my mind, and I just want to throw it out there in case there's any reactions, and that has to do with international leadership. And the TPP and RCEP may be very different projects indeed, but I think that they may be suffering from common deficits, and that's an international leadership deficit. Why I say this, if you go look at the literature on regional integration, they usually make the case that you have to have one country that leads the way, that acts as a focal point, that provides a vision for where we're going, what this project is about. Frequently, this country also will act as a market of last resort, and therefore it becomes that economic magnet that makes this enterprise self-sustaining. And it's a country that should be prepared to play that leadership role by having a domestic consensus that you're really willing to go ahead and negotiate this deeper integration. And I would make the case that, the United States, as Claude was suggesting, one of the reasons why the TPP seems to be stalling is because precisely countries are wondering if the United States is prepared to play that leadership role. And the uncertainty about the TPA highlights this difficulty in generating a domestic consensus and the very dysfunctional relationship between the executive and the Congress in getting Trade Promotion Authority in place. And it should have been done more than yesterday. It shouldn't come to this point. But also I thought it was really exciting and confusing how we all referred to who's driving RCEP. There was no consensus on this table. I made the case that it was China. Others made the case that it was ASEAN. Other countries made the case that nobody leads RCEP. And if there is no leader, shouldn't that worry us? Because that's what I was saying, there's no actor, no country, no project that will push this forward. I had a specific question I thought very interesting, that when Dr. Jiang talked about the different views of the actors involved in RCEP, he mentioned ASEAN, he mentioned Japan, he mentioned India, but he didn't mention China in that point. So it would be very interesting to see how would China play or not a leadership role, and whether, in fact, it's going to be leadership from behind in the sense that India and Indonesia push for the lowest common denominator. But enough from me. I'm going to open it for questions from the floor, and since time is very limited, I'll ask you to briefly identify yourself, be extremely concise in what you want to ask, and I'm going to take 2 or 3 questions at a time to give a chance for more people to express their opinions, short and concise, or ask a question. And please wait for the mic to reach you. So I have 2 people here. I'll take them together since they're in that corner, and then I'll go to the other side. Thank you.
Thanks very much. My name is Sherman Katz. I'm a trade lawyer. I wanted to follow up on Mireya's implication in her opening remarks that there ought to be some forethought about consolidation between RCEP and TPP. And I understand RCEP may move on a much slower track. But I wonder whether any of the 4 panelists can imagine their countries playing, particularly Japan, who sits at both tables, a leadership role on simple things to start with, like rules of origin or like standards.
Thank you. And then the gentleman, if you can pass him the mic. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Vikram Nehru from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Claude, even if there were to be a TPA, what is the probability of there being a currency manipulation clause in it, and what is that going to do to further TPP discussions? Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, very brief responses from the panelists.
Well, I think I would applaud the administration for holding the line, and so far the Republican leadership, both houses, for holding the line. I think the best case would be that you get language not far from what's in the bill that was introduced, the TPA bill that was introduced, which does not tie the executive's hands at the end. I don't know what my colleagues think, but I think to introduce a currency, there are all kinds of substantive problems with it. There's no agreement among economists, including economists across the street here, no agreement certainly among lawyers. And to introduce this at the end of a negotiation would blow the negotiations apart. I can't see others accepting it. But I'll leave, others can speak to their countries better than I.
Any responses?
Well, leadership role for consolidation of the two initiatives. But Japan, well, certainly Japan, well, it's joining the both and institutions or frameworks. But as I mentioned, as far as I know, that's no sort of the coherent approaches on behalf of the Japanese government to the different, the regional integration frameworks. I asked this question to one of the negotiators in the foreign affairs. Well, occasionally, different, the section officers come together in a lunchtime to actually inform each other on what's going on, etc. But Japan's probably one of the problems in terms of the promotion of the regional integration FTA is sort of the lack of the organizational tower, like USTR, for example, or even the Koreans and the minister in charge of trade negotiations, they're powered by the president to control, etc. So I think the control tower and the Japanese bureaucracy in terms of promoting the FTA, it's probably affecting the lack of strong leadership, particularly in connecting, the different regional frameworks. I know some people are joining different, the frameworks as negotiators. But the point is, and currently Japan's media and the government has been too much preoccupied with TPP negotiations, while the CJK, but maybe because of the political problems with Korea and China, and also RCEP. I think this is probably another problem for us to think, these different, the regional integration framework under one single vision. So I think, you're right. I think that's a very difficult issue in Japan at the moment.
Yes, Sanchita, go ahead.
Regarding the leadership in the RCEP question, currently Indonesia is chairing all RCEP meetings. And I think one of the panelists mentioned, it's not China-led RCEP, it's the ASEAN-led RCEP process. And besides Indonesia, I think Singapore plays a very major role in RCEP, even though Singapore doesn't come in the forefront. Regarding the consolidation of TPP and RCEP, I would say it's, from a Singapore point of view, it is there in the trade negotiators' mind that in the long run it's leading to FTAP. But currently they're not worrying about it. They're too busy with negotiating the TPP and working out the modalities for the RCEP. So I don't think any of the countries in the TPP, the dual membership with TPP and RCEP are worrying of that thing at the moment.
I think, as I mentioned, the formula in the RCEP negotiation is ASEAN now chaired by Indonesia. If you consider Indonesia as not an advanced position, so usually ASEAN put on the table probably a mid-level agenda on that. And then on the six-party side, it's rotate chair. Now it's currently chaired by China. And so I think Japan and Australia and New Zealand as a group will push on the higher, and China probably in the upper middle, and have to consider Indians' request. So as a group, probably, put on the table with the ASEAN together a little bit higher than probably ASEAN's, the list. So that's, I call it a smart compromise finally. So one thing I think is very different from TPP, and TPP with a very high expectation, high standard from beginning. But RCEP start from a lower expectation, so it's more flexible. And also they have the pressure to conclude by 2015. They must have something. It's unlike TPP when they have a delayed process. So that's probably some difference. But that's why expert group recommend you have a comprehensive, big down payment at the beginning and leave some difficult things gradually by 2025. Why 2025? Because we all realize originally we think 2020 is APEC's deadline of liberalization. But now we think it's 2020 is too close for Asia Pacific. So probably RCEP set a model and 5 years delay for the original level of the future of BOGO goal. So that set a foundation for the Asia Pacific, which if you consider FTAP. So that's our expert group consider, make it more clear of the future of formulate how the RCEP play the role in the future Asia Pacific.
I guess my feeling is that the down payment is not going to be very large. Indeed, from the what you listed there, actually. But anyway, we'll see.
Okay, we'll continue that talk after we finish here. But I just want to note, Vikram, on your question, I actually just wrote a piece on currency manipulation, and I make the case that the proposals that we're seeing actually do not represent a faithful operationalization of the IMF principles. Hence, many TPP countries, most TPP countries, are not going to be enthused by it. And if the United States insists on bringing enforceable currency manipulation clause into the TPP, it's not the end game at all. You're basically opening up a whole can of worms, and it's going to take a very long time to reach an agreement on that. Okay, two last questions, just because you have indeed been very patient. So I have this lady here, and I have Uri here. And then hopefully the panelists can stick around for a few minutes after to take individual questions, if you don't mind, given that you guys did not have a lot of opportunities. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Reporter from the Voice of America. My question is for Mr. Zhang. And you mentioned that China now shows some interest in participating in TPP. So my question is, what made China change its view to TPP? The second question, can China afford to not join TPP with their ASEP here? Thank you.
All right. And then Uri, wait for the microphone, please. And then super short, 30-second responses, if you don't mind. Thank you. For Uri, yes. Thank you.
Yeah, Uri Dadush with Carnegie. I guess my question is, I don't really understand India's participation in the discussion. If they have a very low level of ambition, which of course comes as no surprise, given history of participation also in the WTO, etc. How is that resolved in the context of regional agreement, and why is India participating in the first place?
Okay, that's going to take a while to answer. So, any other questions? Can you answer that briefly on the TPP?
I think as I mentioned, its official stand has not made very clear whether join or not join. But there is really domestic pressure that if TPP there as a fact, and then China really have the challenge, and also China worries not about the market. According to all the studies, the market for China of TPP is not so large because for most members, China has already made the FTA. And for U.S. market, the fear probably will decline rather than rise. So the real challenge is rulemaking. China try to use this as an occasion or pressure for the new leader group that press the China's quick domestic reform. So that is, I think, really thinking behind. But that very much depends on RCEP's success. If they really can make a good conclusion of RCEP, and then what's the next? As I said, there are two options. One is launch of FTAP as a general, framework for Asia Pacific. And another probably if fail to launch FTAP, and then China may consider. So I think it's not very clear about that, how to make the policy finally. Thank you. Concerning India, I think probably that should ask Japan, because Japan always persuade to let India to join. But I think for India in itself, it's really its eastward policy worried about exclusion. So already India has a 10+1, the ASEAN at a very low level. So, but if, I want to just mention it, the RCEP make it open for India participate or not participate in the beginning. If, for instance, India really cannot accept, so the guidelines make it clear India can join later.
Thank you very much. Takashi-san, do you have a comment?
Of course, I'm no Indian, but of course, India is a huge, the population, and also with some of the key natural resource supplies. So of course, this is very much important for Japan. But I think India, as far as I heard from the Indian newspapers and the government officers, well, 1/3 of the trade are actually executed with the TPP and RCEP members. Of course, given that, India is so much interested in the regional integration framework and both. However, TPP is too much high and simply said difficult. And what I heard, India on RCEP is reluctantly participating. And no wonder, the India's commitment is very, very small. And interestingly, again, I'm not Korean either, but one Korean officer told me, before joining TPP, Korea said, of course, FTA with China is first priority, followed by TPP, although South Korea was not part of that yet. And finally, they said RCEP. Reason, because India was there. I think that Korea had sort of the terrible experiences of negotiating with India. And, well, I don't know. I couldn't say anything. But I think that's maybe true. And particularly if you look at the WTO, the negotiations, particularly, the last time the breaking down was caused by India and also United States. So, but of course, the inclusion of India is very much important, particularly if Indian government consider the regional integration as sort of the source of the energy for promoting domestic reforms.
Thank you so much. We are way over time. It is delightful to see you stay and enjoy these presentations and the comments. Thank you so much for attending today. And please join me in thanking the panelists for a terrific job today.